Sage Wanderer here, coming at you from my van down by the river. So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens when the trucks stop running. Do. What I'm talking about is, apocalypse, end of the world, disaster situation, regardless of the source, that causes the one thing to happen that would ensure most of America's destruction. And that would be for the food distribution system to break down in the United States. Now, what could cause this? Well, what is the number one cause of starvation and famine in the world? Some would say it's poverty, Sage. It's poverty that makes some people starve to death. Others would say, well, it's economic disaster, or it's some kind of natural disaster. This isn't too hard to figure out, although it will surprise many of you to know that the number one cause of famine historically has always been war. War. That's right, war. W-A-R, war. War and violence and international disputes is what is most commonly in the modern world responsible for large-scale food shortages and famine. It's a breakdown of social structure and social order, lawlessness. All of this leads to famine, where there is food, but the distribution of the food is broke down. So a civil war in the United States could trigger a mass disruption in food distribution and the ability to, ship and transport food. Now, also an EMP. If the trucks can't start, the trucks can't run, the systems can't work. Honestly, even a large-scale internet blackout or some kind of Y2K kind of event could, in fact, disrupt, at least for a shorter period of time, food distribution. And so I think that, water is pretty simple. Find it, drink it. Find it, purify it, drink it. Many people will get sick from drinking contaminated water, but most people will know to do something with the water and try to purify it. But if there's no food, there's no food. When an emergency happens, like Superstorm Sandy or, some kind of southern hurricane or an earthquake in California, and people either know it's happening or is afraid it's going to happen or can see it coming, or when it happens, it's too late, to some degree, but people will rush to the stores and try to hoard up and buy the things that they need because so many people just eat hand to mouth. I mean, they're just day to day, like they go to the grocery store every day or they eat out every day, and they don't even have enough food for tomorrow in their house. And, see my Prepping 101 series if you want to talk about procurement, development of a pantry system and food storage for yourself. But, where to find food, because no matter how much you store, okay, if you were going to try to store for, say, a 7-year famine period for you and your family, you need a warehouse and an army of men to guard it. Let's just be real here. That's a lot of food. It takes up a lot of space. The reason we don't keep a year's supply of food in our house is because it's expensive and it's hard to store that much food. And so sooner or later, despite your best preparations, you're going to run out of food if the trucks stop running. If a war breaks out, if civil war breaks out, even if martial law breaks out, you might be forced to go stand in line and get handouts from the National Guard or military troops or the United Nations. You do not know what is ahead or what could happen. So I think you should have an idea of how to procure food in a post-apocalyptic scenario. Now, you can go online and people will teach you how to make a figure 4 snare, and a deadfall rather, and people will teach you how to make a wire snare, and, you can learn to hunt, and people will teach you how to fish, and, and it's a lifetime of hobbies, honestly. There's a lifetime of hobbies involved there. But most people don't want to make food gathering, hunting, fishing, and foraging, their main hobby. They're looking for a quick solution. That's why so many people buy the freeze-dried food and the long-term storage food, because they can throw some money at it and then go back to their video games, or they can go back to whatever other hobbies they have, and they don't want to put in the time it takes to become an expert at hunting, fishing, and gathering. But there are some things that you should be aware of that probably you'd want to expend before you got anywhere near the hunting, fishing, and gathering department. Like at the very beginning of things, there are ways to procure food that are quasi-legal. And you would not do this in a normal circumstances. You would only do this kind of scavengering. And I'm talking about scavengering food. Honestly, I think to scavenge your food is the first level of food procurement once the trucks stop running. That if you don't do it, other people will. Is it looting? Well, I don't know. There's always this argument in times of disasters, whether people busting out store windows, if they're stealing televisions, it's looting. If they're stealing Twinkies, it's probably survival. And, people look at it differently when you're trying to feed yourself in an emergency, when you would buy it if there was anyone there to sell it to you. Now, most of your criminal types, most of your people with lower morals will immediately go straight to the looting. And grocery stores that don't get picked clean, and if there's anything less, they get shut down, because the grocery stores are going to be sold out. Everybody with money is going to buy it. People that don't have money or didn't get there in time, they're going to bust out the window and take what's left, or they're going to bust out the window and take what's in a 7-Eleven or a like a convenience store, and that those places will pretty much be picked clean. I was part of a relief convoy that brought 6,000 pounds of food, water, or 6 tons, so 12,000 pounds of food, water, and gasoline and diapers and that kind of thing into Katrina-ridden New Orleans, right 3 days post-Katrina. I was there. And one of the things that immediately struck me is that just 3 days after Katrina, the stores were completely ripped open and the contents strode across the parking lot. There was sign of rampant looting and fighting over food, and you could see signs of struggle and destruction. I remember, I'll never forget seeing a Church's chicken just ripped from the inside out, and all of its contents and paper cups and things all strode in the wind and blowing in the parking lot with the windows all broken out. But there's some other areas that people wouldn't normally think of where large quantities of food are stored, and that in times of emergency, you might be able to procure them and scavenger this food. Once again, this is illegal, or best quasi-legal, and this is for information purposes only. I'm not encouraging anyone to do these things. But, my second wife was a superintendent of the cafeteria for a school district down in Texas. And, I was married to her during the 2012 thing. And, one of the things we talked about was that because she had the keys to the place and she ran the whole cafeteria department, that even in that tiny little town that she lived in, there in the school, even in the summertime, there was 1,000 pounds worth of staple food stored in the school cafeteria. A lot of people don't think, but that's something that would not be open in the event of an emergency. People would probably forget that was there, except the superintendent and his or her family who knew the storage room was there. So industrial places like schools, for instance, where they're not feeding anybody right then, that food's just stored there. Quasi-legal, but when you're talking about feeding your family and having something to eat, if you don't get to it, the criminals will. Other places to look might be some corporations have cafeterias. Their offices might be closed down. Churches give away food, and they often have food pantries. In the event of a real emergency, a lot of people that run the church probably wouldn't even come home. If there's an abandoned church, you might find food there. Food can be found in a lot of places that you wouldn't think normally food would be found at. So I think scavenging of food would be probably priority number one in the event that you start to get hungry and the trucks aren't running. So next level beyond that would be bartering for food. You know, keeping a pantry and rotating food is it's a big hassle. And, you know, you can buy the freeze-dried food that lasts for 30 years, but that's really, really expensive. And some people, you know, the modern idea is I have money, so therefore I have food, I can just buy food. But in the event of an emergency, people may not be willing to sell you food for paper money, which may or may not be usable or worthwhile. But there are other things that, let's say someone has stockpiled a lot of food, or they were the first people at the grocery store and they got all the food, or they knew the superintendent in the school down there and they emptied the coffers from the from the school stash and they're selling flour by the pound, but they're not taking money. They're not taking money because nobody can eat money and you can't use money in an apocalypse. Now, some people may be selling food for, for silver or gold or some other tangible asset. But chances are you'll be bartering. You'll be trading that second axe that you had that you forgot you had, or that extra knife in your knife collection, or that extra bunch of bullets that you don't necessarily think you might need, but you definitely need to eat. And you're going to be trading something like that for food. Hopefully you won't be trading your wedding ring for food. Hopefully you won't be trading your own body for food and selling yourself to eat, which is what happens in emergencies, unfortunately, to many people. So bartering comes into play. So there are things that you could lay up that last a lot longer than food, that in the event of an emergency you could trade for food. You know, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and they do not, when they pick, okay, first let me say that the Pacific Northwest is very much a breadbasket for the world. People don't realize how much of your apples and your strawberries and your cherries and your fruit come from the Pacific Northwest. Eastern Oregon grows a lot of grain and watermelons and onions and potatoes, Orida potatoes. Orida's Orida. Okay, so yeah, we grow a lot of this food and it ships out to the world from here. But we don't just harvest it all and ship it all out at once. We store it here and we ship it out as it's needed, as the orders come in. So there are warehouses in the Pacific Northwest full of food. Enough food to last all of us for a whole year, because they never ship that away. They keep the projected sales that are local, stored locally. It doesn't make sense to sell off all the food to California just to buy California food and have it brought back up here. So Oregon companies keep the food that they know they're going to sell locally, stored locally. So you have your 1 year, 1 season food supply right here in the Pacific Northwest from the things that are grown here, like green beans. If you're eating green beans in Oregon, they were probably grown in Oregon or Northern California or Southern Washington within a short distance, if not right there in the Willamette Valley. So there are going to be these stores of food, and trucks are not going to be able to run in most of these circumstances, because like the title of this video is "When the Trucks Stop Running." So we're assuming that it's the distribution that's the problem. So one might be able to purchase it from somebody who has control of the warehouse, whether it's the corporation that's controlling it, whether it's some tough guy who's taken control of it because he knows it's there, or the employees of the corporation who know that they have an obligation to help feed the people, and they have this warehouse full of food. But who gets what and at what price. So there might be riots, there could be violence around these places once people figure out where they are. But I'll tell you this, if you don't have something to trade, you probably won't get a can of green beans, because they're not going to give them away for free, more than likely. It's just against human nature. In the event of emergency, people start looking out for number one. Now, at first, typically, before things get real tough, people help each other. But pretty soon, things get more, well, just watch a movie like The Road. The Road, I think, is a very clear indicator of where things could go very quickly in the event of a grid down scenario or a post-nuclear war scenario. Now, I bet you thought I was going to talk about trapping and all of this stuff. Well, I'll talk quickly about that. I don't want to make this too long of a video, but you know, if you're a vegan or a vegetarian and you want to stick to that in the zombie apocalypse, then you better become very familiar with foraging for food. Now, luckily, Oregon has so much natural food in the wild. We have blackberries that grow everywhere. You've seen me contend with them. And those can give you sustenance even in the wintertime when there is no berries, because the leaves themselves are full of vitamin C. And blackberry leaf tea is actually a very good tonic. So there's, you know, wild mushrooms, asparagus. Oregon's the place to be, yo. But no matter where you are, you should learn, if it's important to you, you should learn, you know, being a vegan. If it's important being a vegan or a vegetarian to you, then you should definitely learn how to feed yourself, because a lot of the food going around is going to be meat, because wild game is easier for most people to procure than vegetable matter and wild plants and that sort of thing, which take a little bit more knowledge to master. You don't want to poison yourself and your friends. That would not be good. So I will talk briefly about trapping. And I think that hunting with a firearm in the zombie apocalypse is probably not recommended. Big game hunting, you could do it, but it would make you a target and causes you to have to leave your home and go far distances. So I recommend small game, and anything's edible. If it's wiggling and moving, you can eat it. That's pretty much the way it is, with the exception of spiders and things like that that might have venom. But I picked up something today that I think ought to be in everybody's bug out bag, and it is the ultimate food procuring cheating device. It doesn't require any noise. It's a silent killer, and it works for fish. It works for birds. It works for everything that wiggles. That's any kind of moving creature of size at all. This works for all small game. And what I'm talking about is a thing that we call a yo-yo. This is a yo-yo, an auto reel, and these cost you about $3 or $4 a piece. If you buy them by the dozen, they're cheaper. I think I paid less than $3 for mine, a couple bucks a piece. And you can get them. They come in a box of 12 right here. You can see they call them yo-yos. There we go. All right, yo-yo fishing reel. This is an automatic reel, and essentially it's a snare trigger. And so the reel is on a spring steel like this. And you simply have these notches that are cut in the reel, and then you have this solid metal bar. If you buy any of these yo-yos, get the one that says flat trigger. The reason being is the wire triggers can get beat up by larger animals. But you put the tension by pulling out the string, and you have this tension here, and you set this trigger in the flat spot. It's hard to do and not look right at it. All right, go in there. Alright, sorry, everything's backwards in the camera. It's like trying to do something in a mirror. Okay, so as you can see there, the spring tension is being held back by this little bar trigger. And if anything pulls on this, you see it just reels them in. Now, you're saying, oh, that's a neat little gadget, Sage. Have you ever used it? Oh, yeah. Now, I've got to say, this is cheating in most states. Most states do not allow this fun little device, including the one I'm living in. So you can't use these except in an emergency. But in an emergency, this is a fish catching, animal catching machine, let me tell you. You want to take these and get them in practice with them, but these should be in every bug out bag. I used this yo-yo reel on a lake in Oklahoma where it was legal to collect some of the most beautiful walleye I've ever had the pleasure of eating. I fed the entire neighborhood, me and a buddy of mine, by setting these yo-yos out in a lake in Lawton, Oklahoma. And we pulled up some walleye, and some of them on these, it'll reel in a big old fish because it just plays them. Wait, you gotta have this has got to be pulled back. But, all right. Upside down, everything's upside down, but it plays them. You see, it always has tension, so they can make a run for it, and then it'll just keep pulling them back. It'll just keep pulling them back. It's like having a drag, and you don't even have to be there. You set it and forget it. You get a dozen of these, you bait them up with some grubs or something, you set them and forget them, and when you come back, there'll be fish on here. I've I can't, 50, 60 walleye we caught in about 4 days using these devices on that Oklahoma lake. I've been sold on them ever since. Now, you can't use these unless it's life and death, and then it doesn't matter if you break a couple of game laws if you're trying to survive. And actually, most all states have exceptions. But they typically come with this little string that you can use to, oh man, it's all in a knot. They have this, there's a dozen of them here, but they have this string that comes with it, and you can use that to tie it from a tree limb, hang it out over the water. You can tie this to a bottle and throw it out and bob it in the water from a float. But you can set these under the water so only the string sticks out and no one knows it's there but you, and because you're the one that set it. So yo-yos, wire snares, all of this can produce food way better than hunting. Be an expert in foraging if you're a vegan or a vegetarian. And all of us should know about foraging. Did you know, for instance, that dandelions are edible and nutritious? Yeah, that little weed, the little flower that you're always trying to kill out of your front yard, it's edible. It's actually a beneficial plant. It has a lot of uses. So you should become an expert in foraging, and you know, the earth can feed you if you know how to do it. So step one, scavenge. Step one is storage, put up food. Step two is scavenging, you know, within your own ethical limits to what degree you want to do with that, or bartering with those that have already scavenged or stored. Or then you're left to your own devices, no pun intended. And yeah, can you fish? Can you hunt? Do you know how to make a snare? Do you have some cheating devices hidden back in your back pocket? You know, it's going to be the simple things in life. Being able to eat comes before everything else, really. Drinking water and eating are the basic essentials. Breathing, drinking fluids, and eating is something every one of us have to do. So, yeah, how would you procure food in a zombie apocalypse, in a grid down scenario? Would you be at the FEMA camp with your hand out, or would you be self-reliant? God save our republic.